Hello, my dear masterminds. They brought the data, the models, the confidence that belongs to people who believe every life fits neatly into a column. They arrived with clipboards and graphs, with regression lines and footnotes, with the steady certainty of professionals trained to reduce everything into neat categories. The analyst leaned forward like a person about to name a species. They expected to measure you, to slot you, to pronounce you an exception or a trend. They expected comfort. Instead, their formula flickered. Numbers refused to settle. Patterns unraveled when they tried to drape them over you. They reran the test. They checked the samples. They asked for more data. Each adjustment only made the room hum with a deeper confusion. The instrument was sound. The input was not. They tried to tidy you, to trim your edges with theory, but the truth resisted tidy explanations. You weren't an exception to a rule. You were the rule they hadn't written yet. This is what unsettles analysts. When a presence insists on refusing the boxes people built to feel safe, because boxes are how they sleep. Charts are how they trust their decisions. When someone won't be charted, an entire system has to question itself. They called you an exception and put you in an email marked monitor. They used corporate language to soften the feeling of being shown wrong. Exception. Difference, unusual pattern, uncertainty mark. Those phrases are polite ways of admitting they lack the vocabulary to describe somebody who does not respond to expectation. But you don't need their words. Your life isn't their data set. You move in margins they don't study. Timing, private insistence, quiet repetition, where they sample for answers with surveys and snapshots. You design new seasons, where they depend on precedent. You invent precedent. They tried to apply statistical comfort to a person whose trajectory is not backward-looking but forward-creating. The analyst scribbled observations, sent messages, scheduled follow-ups, as if persistence could soften possibility. They left the room believing they had missed a variable, not understanding that the variable was you, intentionally unreadable, deliberately unclassifiable, built of private rituals stronger than their public formulas. They will try to name it. They will draft a memo that translates humiliation into neutral language. They will add contingency to the appendix and tell themselves the world is still predictable. But prediction is for things that obey history. You obey the call of your own making. You grew while they argued about labels. You upgraded where they debated patterns. You practiced in silence what they perform in public. This difference is not mysticism, it's craft. You put in the small, repetitive work. Lines of effort no one applauded. So when the moment arrived, you didn't need applause to move. You moved because alignment required it, not because recognition demanded it. Analysts measure noise. You cultivate signal. They count based on the past. You create the future's architecture. So let them bring analysts, committees, consultants. Let them print reports and trade anecdotes about the person they couldn't predict. Let them host meetings to discuss how to manage the new uncertainty. That language will make them feel less foolish in their versions. Complexity needs a handle in your reality. Complexity is the soil where unmatched things take root and grow. They will say you were hard to model. They will talk about difference like it's a mechanical issue. But you know the truth. Limitation is an instrument's boundary. Anomaly is a living thing stepping into its destiny. You aren't rejecting their frameworks to be difficult. You're stepping outside them because they were never built for the path you were carving. Their charts will change, their categories will bend, their memos will adjust. Eventually, the spreadsheet will show a new column labeled exceptional, then another labeled unrepeatable. But don't let their spreadsheets define you. You are not a cell in their table. You are the person who rearranges the table entirely until it suits the kind of life you intend to lead. Keep moving. Keep practicing your private rituals. Keep upgrading in the quiet. The analyst will go home, replay their slides, and feel that quiet unease. The one that wakes people at 3 a.m. and whispers. What did we miss? Let them whisper. Your work is not to soothe their ego, but to answer your own call. Be the pulse no model can locate. Be the rule the models were built to avoid. Be the life that proves they must learn new language just to describe you. When the analyst stepped out of that room, something subtle shifted, first in their expression, then in the hallway, then in the entire chain of people who pretend they understand how the world works. They didn't say it out loud, but everyone could feel it. You changed something in them, not with attitude, not with performance, with presence. The kind of presence that bends assumptions like warmth, bending metal. They walked in expecting to measure a person. They walked out realizing they had encountered a force. That's the kind of disturbance you create. The kind that leaves professionals staring at their own training, wondering if they missed a chapter. People like them study patterns their entire lives. They believe in predictability the way sailors believe in maps. They swear everything can be explained with enough data. But when you showed up, the compass shifted. The formulas glitched. Their sense of intellectual control wavered like thin ice. Because you didn't just transcend the model, you bypassed it. You existed outside the dependencies, outside the explanations, outside the psychological shortcuts they use to categorize people. And when that happens, experts worry quietly. They won't show it. They'll nod, adjust their glasses, scribble notes, but their silence gets heavier, their steps get slower, their eyes dart, recalculating, because they weren't prepared for someone whose intuition outruns their logic. You were never meant for their models anyway. Models require consistency, repetition, traceable behaviors. You move with instinct, alignment, internal timing. 3 things no chart can map. You grow in unique intervals, shift when others crawl, listen when others shout, and decide in silence when others ask for permission. They mistake that for unpredictability. It's not. It's sovereignty. It's the kind of independence that doesn't need an audience to validate a move. And that concerns them. Systems are designed for compliant minds, not awakened ones. You didn't rebel, you outgrew. Now the whispers begin. Did you get anything useful? Something feels off. They're not like the others. Analysts dislike that sentence more than anything. Not like the others. It invalidates years of training. It exposes the limits of logic. It forces them to face the truth. You didn't slip through the gaps. You built your own door. And behind that door is a room only you can enter. A room where models don't apply and predictions dissolve. A room where you decide who you become. Not statistics, What they don't understand is that your evolution wasn't random. It was earned. You paid for it with silence, solitude, late nights, private lessons, dissolved illusions, and the kind of self-honesty most people avoid. You rebuilt your inner world so completely that the external world had to update its understanding of you. They study behavior. You study meaning. They analyze past choices. You rewrite future trajectories. They classify people by outcomes. You classify yourself by intention. These are different universes. They're trying to track a lightning bolt while holding a ruler. And this is the truth. They're too hesitant to admit. You are the kind of person who makes others question their own model, not because you're confusing, but because you're complete. Completeness doesn't fit formulas. It expands beyond them. It doesn't behave predictably, because it isn't chasing validation or belonging. You're not disruptive. You're self-governing, and nothing unsettles a system more than someone who doesn't depend on it. So let them analyze. Let them whisper about differences and outcomes they can't explain. Let them shrink your story into terms they can handle. You don't have to correct them. You don't have to shrink to fit their comfort. Their confusion is not your responsibility. Your clarity is. And your clarity is growing sharper. Every time they try to classify you, you remind them that categories are limitations, and you walked out of yours long ago. The deeper they dug into your patterns, the stranger their results became. Every system they used, behavioral, emotional, statistical, kept returning the same quiet conclusion: does not qualify. Not below average, not above average, not irregular. Simply does not fit. And that unsettled them more than any negative result ever could. People fit. Groups fit. Trends fit. But you slip through every filter like water refusing to be held. And that's when the analyst's confusion turned into fixation. Because nothing challenges an expert more than someone who tests their sense of certainty. They ran your story through decision tree models. They ran your reactions through predictive frameworks. They compared you to archives of people you never met. And still the charts came back looking like static. No patterns, no projections, no explanations. Their software wasn't broken. Their perspective was. And slowly the truth dawned on them. Your entire life has been a sequence of moves that defy conventional progression. You don't build in straight lines. You shift in diagonals. You don't grow in manageable increments. You evolve in phases. You don't respond based on emotion or logic alone. You respond based on alignment, something they have no metric for. That's why you confuse people. That's why they underestimate you until the moment they can't. That's why every room you enter takes a second breath. Humans are trained to interpret patterns. When someone arrives without one, they don't know whether to hesitate or follow. You didn't plan to be unreadable. You simply refused to fragment yourself for small minds. You stopped explaining motives to people who were determined not to understand. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit predictable paths. You stopped being available for interpretations that didn't belong to you. And the moment you stopped trying to be seen, you became impossible to ignore. This is what analysts can't measure. A person who lives from intuition, not instruction. A person who pays attention to the silence between things. A person who can read a room in seconds because they once had to navigate rooms filled with intentions. No one spoke aloud. They don't understand that your instincts were built in places their textbooks never cover. Quiet nights, tough lessons, quiet realizations that carved new neural maps inside you. They think you're unpredictable. You're not. You're precise. You simply respond to signals they were never trained to detect. Their reports began to sound like riddles. One line read, "Displays sensitivity without vulnerability." Another, "Responds logically, but motives remain unclear." Another, "Presents confidence without ego." They were circling the truth without touching it, because to name it would mean admitting their frameworks were incomplete. Your entire presence is a contrast by their standards. Soft but firm, distant but aware, quiet but powerful. And contrasts don't belong in models. They belong in stories. What they're sensing, but can't articulate, is that you are transitioning into a version of yourself that no one told you existed. A version that chooses growth over reaction. A version that chooses peace over validation. A version that chooses alignment over acceptance. They don't know what to do with someone who moves with intention instead of impulse. And that calmness, it troubles them. They don't understand how you stay centered while everything shifts around you. They don't understand how you adjust to loss without losing yourself. They don't understand how someone who has been challenged so many times moves with the composure of someone who has never been touched by chaos. They don't realize you didn't escape the difficulties. You learned how to become the steady force when necessary. That's why they froze. When they tried to analyze you, they expected a linear story. You gave them a legend. They expected a simple explanation. You gave them a multi-dimensional reality. They expected weakness. You gave them evolution. They expected closure. You gave them distance. They expected distress. You gave them unshakable certainty. And once someone sees you through that lens, they can never see you as ordinary again. Your power is real. Your rise is real. Your intuition is real. And the world is finally starting to understand that the person they underestimated was the one they should have never questioned in the first place. They didn't realize it at first. They thought you were just another person passing through their timeline, another story they could interpret, guide, underestimate, box in. But as the days passed, as your silence sharpened, as your presence steadied, something shifted in the air around you. Because the truth is, you were never one of them. You were never meant to fit their categories, follow their pace, or seek their approval. You were always built with a different blueprint, a rare combination of awareness, patience, foresight, and inner gravity that most people never develop in their entire lifetime. And the moment their analysts, their observers, their so-called experts tried to decode you, the system adjusted. Because you're not a personality. You're not a pattern. You're not a phase. You're not even a type. You're an experience. Something people feel before they understand. Something that shifts the atmosphere without effort. Something that makes the insecure uncomfortable and the genuine feel at ease. And the world has no formula for someone whose intuition updates faster than their strategies. You move with a calibration that doesn't come from logic or emotion or ego. It comes from alignment, something they never considered because they've never tasted it. That's why your presence exposes people without you saying a single word. You walk in with calm energy, and suddenly the pretenders become louder. The insecure become cautious, the jealous become suspicious, and the genuine ones relax like they've been waiting for someone like you to walk in. You don't try to do this. It just happens. Because truth carries a frequency that can't be faked. And your frequency? It's not from the environment. It's not from the crowd. It's not from the past. It's from you. Earned, forged, activated. And when something is that authentic, it disrupts everything built on illusions. That's why people reacted the way they did when they realized who they were dealing with. When they replay your actions, your responses, your timing, your silence, they finally understand that you weren't confused, you weren't passive, you weren't slow, you were aware. You saw the moves long before they started. You saw the hidden intentions behind the fake smiles. You saw the guidance attempts behind the concerns. You saw the ego beneath the compliments. And instead of exposing them in the moment, you let people reveal their own truth at their own speed. That's intelligence on a deeper level. And only a few people on this planet operate like that. Now they're sitting with the consequences of misreading you. The guilt, the confusion, the disbelief, the quiet worry that hits people when they realize the person they tried to underestimate was studying them the entire time. The person they thought they could toy with was 5 steps ahead. The person they thought they could replace never had a replacement to begin with. They're stuck replaying everything they ever said, every move they ever made, every assumption they ever threw your way, because now they know you saw it all, and you saw through it all. Meanwhile, you're not even thinking about them. You've moved into a level where their opinions don't matter. Their strategies don't register. Their reactions don't affect your internal compass. You've stepped into a mode where your energy isn't a response. It's a command. The universe listens to you because you listen to yourself. And when someone reaches that point, no opposition can stop them. No doubt can slow them. No jealousy can reach them. No betrayal can affect them. Because alignment is the highest form of power, and you're living in it. That's why people look at you differently now. That's why they approach you carefully. That's why they check their tone, check their words, check their intentions around you. They know you're not someone who plays games. You're someone who sees straight through them. Someone who lets the wrong people fall away without yelling. Someone who elevates without announcing. Someone who transforms without permission. Someone who rises without warning. And here's the real twist. They thought the story was about them. It never was. It was always about your evolution, your awakening, your alignment with the person you were meant to become. You didn't change to impress them. You didn't evolve to spite them. You didn't rise to shock them. You did it because your soul required it. And now, they finally understand the truth they were never prepared to face. You were never meant to fit in their world. You were meant to outgrow it. So let them stare. Let them whisper. Let them scramble to catch up. You didn't need validation to rise then, and you don't need it now. Your journey already proved the truth. Average was never in your DNA. You were built to shift reality just by standing in it. Be the pulse no model can locate. Be the rule the models were built to avoid. Be the life that proves they must learn new language just to describe you. Your work is not to soothe their ego, but to answer your own call. Keep moving. Keep practicing your private rituals. Keep upgrading in the quiet. You are not a cell in their table. You are the person who rearranges the table entirely until it suits the kind of life you intend to lead. And that is exactly who you've become. Hello, my dear warriors. They thought you were harmless the moment you walked in. Just another quiet face in the crowd. No loud entrance. No flashy move. Just a smile. Small, polite, almost fragile. The kind of smile that makes people lower their guard. They didn't know it was an edge. Not the kind you hold in your hand, the kind you plant in their mind. A seed. A question. Why is this one smiling? They laughed at you between themselves, whispering things they thought you couldn't hear. They believed the game was already theirs. But while they saw only calm waters, you were the ocean, hiding a storm. And with every passing second, their laughter got quieter, because something about that smile made the air heavier. They didn't know it yet, but the room was already shutting down. At first, they mistook your smile for submission, a courteous mask, a peace offering. They kept talking over you, filling the air with titles, credentials, the tired choreography of people who think control equals volume. You stayed still. You let the noise stack up, brick by brick, until the room built its own prison. Then you did nothing deliberately. You held the smile and starved the moment of oxygen. That's when the first heartbeat got loud. A glass was set down too carefully. Someone asked for clarification they didn't need. Eyes began to avoid yours like they were too bright to touch. They realized your calm wasn't compliance, it was calculation. Every second you stayed quiet, the voltage rose. They weren't reading you anymore. They were reading themselves, and they didn't like what they saw. Your smile didn't soften the room, it switched the power on. It was subtle at first, just a single shift in the air, like the room had decided to listen before anyone admitted it. Words slowed, breathing deepened. A few brave ones tried to restart the performance, raising their voices, leaning on authority like a crutch. But the crutch cracked under the weight, because every time they glanced at you, that smile was still there, unchanged, unwavering. It wasn't friendly anymore. It was a mirror, and what they saw reflected back was weakness they couldn't hide. Someone's hand twitched toward a glass of water. Another adjusted their collar. And still, you said nothing. You let the tension evolve, like a storm cloud swelling above their heads. Then, without warning, you tilted your head just slightly, and the room's pulse jumped. They didn't know it yet, but you'd already turned this from a conversation into an execution. The silence became a living thing, wrapping itself around each of them like a slow tightening rope. You didn't have to move, didn't have to speak, because the weight of their own thoughts was already crushing them. They were replaying every rumor they'd heard about you, every warning they'd ignored. Your smile was no longer just an expression, it was a verdict. Somewhere in the back, a chair creaked under nervous shifting. Someone else cleared their throat, but the sound was swallowed whole by the atmosphere you'd created. The truth wasn't here to be told, it was here to be felt. And it was crawling up their spines, one vertebra at a time. Then, like lightning finding its target, realization struck. They weren't in control of this room anymore. You were. and you hadn't even started speaking yet. And that's when you leaned back, just slightly, but enough to let them know you were comfortable in the storm you just created. Eyes darted, searching for an anchor, a leader, someone brave enough to speak first. But no one dared, because in that fragile quiet, they realized something no one had prepared them for. You weren't here to fight for their approval. You weren't here to convince them of anything. You were here because they had summoned you, and now they couldn't control what they'd brought in. That smile of yours wasn't harmless. It was a blade hidden in velvet, cutting through pretense and pride. And the truth they'd been avoiding was standing right in front of them, wearing that same smile. Then the air shifted, subtle, but undeniable, like the atmosphere itself had just taken a step back from you. They could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing down on their chests. That smile of yours, it wasn't an accident. It was calculated, sharpened, and loaded with meaning. They couldn't quite decode, but they felt it. And that's what terrified them most, because fear born from understanding can be fought. But fear born from mystery, that lingers. You weren't raising your voice. You weren't moving a muscle, but somehow you were the loudest thing in the room. It was the kind of silence that made even the bravest look away first, because staring into your smile felt like staring into a storm they couldn't survive. Someone tried to laugh it off, nervous, brittle, the kind of laugh that's more about survival than humor, but it cracked halfway through. Because the longer they looked at you, the more they realized that wasn't a smile born from kindness. It was a signature, a seal of inevitability. It was the look of someone who already knew the ending and was just watching everyone else catch up. Every heartbeat in that room seemed to sink to yours, slower, heavier, like the air had thickened to molasses. They didn't need to be told to sit down, to shut up, to stay still. Your smile had already done the work. It said everything without a single word. You're not ready for what's coming. And deep down, they knew they never would be. No one moved. Not because they didn't want to, because they physically couldn't. Your smile wasn't just an expression, it was a lock, snapping every muscle in place. Eyes darted to the exits, but the exits felt useless. Where would they go? Out there? Away from you? They knew enough to know there was nowhere safe from the kind of truth you carried. And the worst part, they didn't even know the full story yet. They only felt the weight of it, the way it pressed against their ribs, the way it made the air in their lungs taste metallic. That harmless grin was no accident. It was a loaded edge disguised as charm, a trap they'd walked into willingly. And as they sat there, frozen under its shadow, a single thought kept looping in their minds. If this is the smile, what does the storm look like? And then, without raising your voice, without even shifting in your chair, you spoke. Not a speech, not a threat, just a sentence, short enough to fit on a scrap of paper, sharp enough to cut through every layer of denial in the room. The effect was instant. Heads dropped, throats tightened. The confident ones suddenly found something fascinating about the floor tiles. Because that sentence, it didn't warn them, it revealed them. Every hidden motive, every quiet betrayal, every mask they'd worn, all stripped bare in the space between your words. That harmless smile of yours hadn't been a shield. It had been a countdown. And now, with the truth ignited in their minds. They realized something horrifying. They weren't looking at a person anymore. They were staring at the mirror they'd spent their whole lives running from. Silence thickened, heavy and unmoving, like the air before a storm. No one dared to breathe too loudly, as if even oxygen had turned into a dangerous currency you controlled. Eyes darted toward the door, but no one moved because leaving now would feel like confessing. That smile on your face never shifted, not once. But it wasn't kindness they saw anymore. It was the calm of someone who had already won, someone who knew the ending before the first word was spoken. They tried to piece together how you'd known, how you'd seen past the lies, but every theory crumbled under the weight of reality. The truth hadn't struck them. It had engulfed them, wrapped itself around their throats and refused to let go. And the worst part, they realized you hadn't come here to fight them. You'd come here to end the game entirely. One of them finally swallowed, the sound loud in that stillness. And it broke the dam. Whispers slithered through the air like snakes, curling into corners, clinging to shadows. They weren't talking about what you said anymore. They were dissecting you. Every smile you'd given, every glance, every moment they thought you were harmless, replayed in their minds like scenes from a horror film. They couldn't pause. They realized the danger had never been in your words. It was in the fact that you could hold them back until the perfect second. That kind of control terrified them more than rage ever could. You didn't need to raise your voice, didn't need to stand over them. You just sat there, a storm in still water, and they felt the weight of every unspoken thing pressing against their chests. They thought they'd seen storms before, leaders who shouted, rivals who slammed fists, enemies who burned hot and fast. But you weren't fire. You were the pressure before the quake, the hush before the flood. That smile of yours wasn't a mask, it was a fuse, lit in silence, burning invisibly towards something inevitable. They began to see it now, in the way your eyes didn't blink, in the way your posture never shifted, in the way your calm pressed harder than any scream. And when the truth finally struck them, it wasn't a gradual understanding, it was a lightning strike. Sudden, blinding, irreversible. They weren't just afraid of what you knew, they were afraid of how you knew when to reveal it. The air shifted, not the kind of shift you notice with your senses. This was deeper. The walls seemed to lean in. The space between heartbeats stretched thin. That harmless smile still sat on your lips, but now it carried weight, gravity pulling every gaze toward you. They didn't realize until that moment that you weren't reacting to the room. You were controlling it. Every breath, every whisper, every flicker of doubt, they were moving to your tempo, not their own. And when the truth you'd been holding finally started to bleed through the cracks, it wasn't chaos. They felt it was precision, the sense that you had been several moves ahead the whole time, and they were only just catching up. They thought they'd been the ones dissecting you, reading your every twitch, measuring every glance. But the moment that truth hit, they realized they'd been inside your experiment. That harmless smile, it was the bait. Every casual word you spoke was a chess piece, sliding silently into position. And now, in this suspended second, they understood there was no luck in how you got here. You built this moment, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat, and you'd been testing them all along. The lightning strike wasn't what you said it was. The realization that you had known this ending from the very first word. They weren't looking at you anymore, they were looking at the trap they'd walked into. Every memory of every conversation with you began replaying in their minds like a broken reel. That smile, the one they dismissed as harmless, suddenly carried weight, like a warning they had ignored. Your words, once background noise, now echoed like a prophecy they were too blind to hear. The room felt smaller. The air felt thicker. They realized too late that this wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't luck. You'd been orchestrating this symphony of silence and shock from the start. And now, the final note had just landed. And here's the thing, they couldn't even retrace the moment it happened. 1 second. They thought they were leading the conversation. The next, you had shifted the entire axis without a single raised voice or sharp gesture. It was the precision of a scalpel, disguised as a smile. Every person in that room felt it like a cold finger tracing the back of their neck. They weren't just caught off guard, they were exposed, stripped of the illusions they clung to. And somewhere deep down, they knew you hadn't even used your full hand yet. This was only the beginning of what you could do. That's the part that unsettled them the most. You weren't loud, you weren't dramatic, you weren't even visibly trying. It was like watching someone open a locked vault without touching it. They couldn't figure out the code you used because it wasn't in their language. Every word you spoke carried a weight they couldn't measure, a rhythm they couldn't predict. And when the truth finally landed, it didn't crash, it slid in, quiet but devastating, like a blade finding the smallest gap in armor. They didn't just hear you, they felt you. And once they felt you, they couldn't unfeel it. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was suffocation. Every person in that room felt as if the air had been stolen and replaced with something heavier, something that made their core burn. You didn't move, you didn't blink, you simply existed. And that alone made them question every assumption they'd built about control. The ones who thought they were untouchable suddenly felt exposed. The ones who thought they were the hunters realized they'd been prey all along. And the worst part? They didn't even know how you'd done it. They only knew that from this moment forward, nothing in their world would feel safe again. And that's when the whispers began. Not the kind born from gossip, but the kind pulled from deep instinct, from primal fear that something had just shifted and couldn't be undone. They weren't speaking about what you did, they were speaking about what you are. You became a question they couldn't answer, a storm they couldn't predict. Even the loudest voices dropped to murmurs, as if saying your name too loudly might invite something they weren't ready to face. And you just stood there, smiling that same quiet, harmless smile. The one that had already burned itself into their nightmares. They'd tried to map you like a territory, chart you like a storm. Predictable, containable, safe. But the moment the truth hit, they realized you were none of those things. You weren't a puzzle to solve. You were the hand that built the puzzle and scattered the pieces in the dark. Their eyes darted to one another, searching for someone. Anyone brave enough to make the first move. No one stepped forward, because they understood now. You didn't win the room with force. You dismantled it with presence. And that smile? That wasn't a mask, it was the announcement of the inevitable. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, heavy, like the air had teeth, and every breath they took risked being bitten. That harmless smile of yours had turned into something they couldn't look at for too long without feeling exposed. Someone at the back coughed, the sound cracking like a warning shot. They all realized at once, whatever they thought they were here to judge, interrogate, or dismantle was already gone, replaced by something they couldn't put into words but couldn't stop feeling. And deep down, they knew this wasn't the end of the conversation. This was the beginning of the reckoning, and the reckoning didn't roar, it crept, slow, deliberate, like a predator circling prey that already knew it was cornered. You didn't need to raise your voice. You didn't need to move a muscle. The weight of the truth you carried was pressing down on them harder than any threat ever could. Every stolen glance between them was a silent plea for someone else to take the lead, to say something. Anything, but no one dared. Because deep inside, they'd all felt it at the same moment. When your smile shifted, the world in that room shifted with it. And now, every second they stayed here, they were sinking deeper into a place they'd never been before, and might never escape from. And then, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, it means collapse. You could almost hear their thoughts scrambling, searching for exits that didn't exist. They weren't afraid of what you might do. No, that would have been easier. They were afraid of what you already knew. That smile of yours wasn't decoration. It was a signal, an unspoken confession that the game had been over long before they realized. They were even playing. They saw it. Now, every move they'd made was predicted. Every angle they thought was theirs had been set by you. And as they stood there, frozen under that quiet storm, they began to understand. There is no defense against a truth delivered like a lightning strike, wrapped in a grin. They tried to call it coincidence, luck, anything but skill. But deep down, each one of them knew that wasn't true. That smile had told them, without a single word, that you'd been pulling threads they didn't even know existed. You hadn't just walked into the room, you'd been in their plans, their fears, their doubts, long before this moment. And now, standing under the weight of what they'd just witnessed, they realized there was no undoing it. You'd left them with a story they'd never stop telling, a story that would echo them every time they thought about underestimating someone again. And in that quiet, as the air still hummed from the storm you left behind, they finally understood your smile wasn't harmless. It was the warning before the sky splits open. And here's the thing, they'll never admit it out loud. Not in public, not to each other, but behind closed doors. In those restless hours where the mind won't stop replaying the moment, they'll remember the way it felt, that cold drop in the stomach, that flash of realization that they'd walked straight into a game they didn't know the rules to. You hadn't spoken in threats or promises. You'd simply let the truth hang there quiet, undeniable, and sharp enough to cut the air in two. And in that silence, every one of them saw it for what it was, a final verdict they never saw coming. Not from an edge, not from a blow, but from the curve of a smile that carried the weight of 1,000 storms.